Welcome to the Defence Property Podcast, the podcast where we talk about all things property investing and real estate for Australian Defence Force personnel. Whether you're looking to build and scale a property portfolio or relocating across Australia, we've got the insights and tips for less stress and more success. Let's dive in.
And welcome back to another episode of the Defence Property Podcast. I'm your host, Kane Drury from Discover Buyers Agency. And today we're sitting with a former member of the Australian Army, a property investor, and he's got a great story to share. So welcome to the podcast, Ben Welsh.
Thanks for having me, mate. Good to be here.
Hey, likewise. Awesome. Well, I guess to kick off, Ben, bit of an exciting career, bit of an exciting property portfolio, some good results. First, just introduce yourself, who is Ben, and we'll go from there.
Too easy. Righto. Well, I guess starting off early. So I was an army brat. So in and around defence, my entire life essentially. So my old man was infantry. And I was born in Sydney. But obviously moved around a fair bit. So born in Sydney, lived in Adelaide, Kalgoorlie in Western Australia. And Wagga, and then back to Sydney. We stayed in Sydney after that, so I could start high school and kind of have a bit of stability through high school, so finished high school, and joined up the year after. So finished up in school in 2004 with HSC, and joined up pretty much straight after that. So kind of had decided through high school that I wasn't really keen on, there wasn't anything that I really wanted to do uni-wise that would justify the debt that I'd have to go into for HECS fees and all that sort of stuff. So pretty much as decided I'll follow in the old man's footsteps and join up.
Yeah, lovely.
So it was a bit of a weird one. I probably didn't put as much thought into it as I probably should have. And the old man was infantry, so I started the process aiming at that. But after I'd done, all the testing and all that sort of stuff on the Joe's days and all that, they're like, oh look, your mechanical aptitude and all that, you scored fairly high in. So they gave me three options, none of which were infantry. So from memory, I think they offered me vehicle mechanic, the old SES like firefighter role, which I don't think exists anymore, and gun number. So
it's an interesting combination,
isn't it? Yeah, that's what I thought too, and so had a bit of a think about it, and I figured, oh well, might as well get a trade to give me something a bit more concrete, especially after defence. So picked that. Having said that, although I did have a decent mechanical aptitude, I had absolutely no mechanical experience. So it was very much from point zero for that. But once I was into it, really enjoyed it. So joined up. Did basics, did IATs down at Latchford, and went to Sydney for OJTs, was lucky enough to get posted back into Sydney for my first posting. So did Special Operations Logistics Squadron to start with, which was a pretty good starter unit. And as fate would have it, I was 9 months out of OJTs when I landed my first deployment. So did Afghanistan for 6.5, 7 months.
Yep. And that was 2010.
Yes.
Yeah.
08, 09. So I think I left in December 08 and came back mid 09.
Yeah. Okay.
So came back. And, obviously all the temptation was there around, buying a nice car or,
holidays.
Yeah, traveling or something like that. But I was a bit of an old man in a 20-year-old's body. So I decided I wanted property more than anything. So bought a principal place of residence in in southwest Sydney.
Or young and wise with foresight on property?
Yeah, well, but it's one of those things. It was dumb luck. It was really just looking for something that was close enough to Holsworthy that I didn't have too much of a commute,
Yeah,
and was within the price range. Also happened to be close to my parents,
yeah.
which made it a bit easy once we started the family and all that. So
So this purchase was in 2010. What were you
Mhm.
still at Souls then, or what year did you go to your next year?
No, because my first posting was maybe only 2 years.
Yeah,
So yeah. So I think I was at 17 construction by then, which
yeah,
was my
okay.
second unit. So
And
so again, got really lucky, got back to backs in Sydney,
yep.
and that's where I met some strange characters in 17, present company included.
I don't know
Um,
what he's talking about. I know nothing.
so bought early on while I was at 17. In fact, I think I remember my DOHAS payment coming through while I was on the sea vehicle maintenance course.
So I just want to
Which
pause and go back there. So you've obviously come back from overseas. You've got all your Afghan money sitting in the bank. You returned. Sounds like roughly the middle, the second half of the year of '09, and then 10 you get posted to a new unit. Um, and obviously you've got this thought about don't waste it, spend it on property, and you've chosen to buy an own occupier. How much? Where did you hear about, or how did you learn about HPAS? Because that's one that probably a lot of, I would say, definitely a lot of just defence people in general, but current people have, like, more people have heard about DOAS, and there's a bit more education within the defence system about the three lenders and just what DOAS is, and it's commonly used, I guess, as a well, it is a bit of a retention scheme as well, or
Yep.
additional benefit. But HPAS is one that's a bit more quietly kept. So how did you, just knowledge and talking to the guys in the workshop, do you have a good chain of command, or you're just pretty resourceful yourself? How did you hear about it?
Yeah, so probably just a bit more resourceful myself, I think was the main thing. So I'm a bit of a cheapskate. So it's something I trying to make a habit of is, when I go into a new role, understanding the entitlements
Yep.
and all the things you have access to. So I think it's something I found when I was just, skating through entitlements and the old handbooks you used to get with all
Yep.
your entitlements. And I can't remember
Yep.
the name of it now off the top of my head, but yeah, had been through that and I saw it in there. So, did a little bit of research and understood, what the requirements were and all that sort of stuff. And yeah, and I think from memory, I probably found out about HPAS before, I'd seriously contemplated actually buying property because,
Yeah. Okay.
prior to having the deployment, it wasn't really an option. Like I didn't have the cash saved up, or anything like that. So it was the deployment that really gave me the deposit. But I think HPAS probably made a pretty significant difference in, saying that, this is something that's
Yeah.
feasible and something that, we could do. Um, so yeah, it was more just exploring my entitlements and what was available to me, finding
And
it that
that
lined up.
come through after settlement. You didn't use it as funds to complete or anything.
No, it came through after settlement.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I'm
Yeah.
pretty sure we had
Perfect.
met the
Sweet.
contract or something.
And what about
And then
finding the property? You just went and searched and found it yourself on weekends, and stumbled your own way through it.
yeah, and like I said, it was at the time I kind of knew that I wanted my own place.
Yep.
And my parents had actually bought in '99, I think. So it was when the old man got back from East Timor.
Yep.
So prior to that, we were in married quarters and that sort of stuff for my entire life. And when I got posted to Sydney, went de facto with the missus, and we got a married quarter, and like we're in rent assistance for a little bit, and then went into a married quarter. So I'd been through all those processes in with defence, and just kind of wanted that security of having my own home. And also didn't hurt that I'd seen my parents' wealth grow
Yep.
based off when they bought, and like I said, similar area. So knew that they made a lot in capital gains with buying the property that they did at that time. Um, so didn't know anything about investing, didn't know anything about rent vesting or anything like that. I don't think it was really a big thing back then.
Yeah.
So it was really just about wanted my place, wanted a place for my family.
Yeah.
And like literally wasn't looking at growth statistics or anything like that. All that mattered to me was in a nice enough district, close to shops, close to schools, reasonable commute to get into work to Holsworthy, and that was about it. And that it happened to be in a reasonably good growth area was really more luck than
Yeah.
any form of conscious decision. So
Yeah. Lovely. And so then you've brought it in 2010. You're at 17 construction. Where was your next unit and posting after that?
yep. So after 17, really got lucky and went back into SF. So I went to Commando Regiment.
Oh, lovely.
So I did 3 years there. That's when my luck kind of ran out. So after that, got posted to Townsville up to 3 Sisby, I think, from memory.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, look, really enjoyed Townsville, but was a bit of a culture shock, obviously going from special forces units and the construction squadron,
Yeah.
where it is a bit more kind of relaxed and you're just kind of trusted to do your own thing to sort of going into the broader army, or it's a little more micromanaged, a lot more time outfield, a lot of that sort of stuff was a little bit of culture shock. Didn't love it. But also realized pretty quick that if I did stay in Townsville, I was going to end up spending almost I was a corporal at that stage and only needed sub one to go to sergeant. And with the makeup of the workshop at the time, it became pretty obvious pretty quickly that I was probably going to spend upwards of 6 months out of every year away from home, like outfield, non-exercise, and all that sort of stuff. And didn't really think that was fair to drag the missus and at the time the first child away from all their support networks in Sydney and then disappear off into the bush for 6 months out of every year. So started looking for civvy jobs while I was up in Townsville.
And this was what year was this?
I'd say 2016.
Yeah. Okay. And you had kept your Sydney property as a rental. Did you put a tenant in it?
Yes, we did, and that's its own story. So again, like I said, that was a bit of a learning curve because I didn't know anything about investing,
managing.
gearing.
It was that accidental investment that we call it, where people, and it happens with civilians as well as defence, that we buy a property, live in and move away for whatever career reason and retain it as an investment, but it was never intended to be that.
Yep.
Yeah.
So rented out, lined up property manager, everything was ticking along nicely, and obviously moved into a married quarter in Townsville, which is nice, out of Bushland Beach. So everything was all good until it wasn't. So obviously you go through you vet your tenants and all that sort of stuff. Had a pretty wide variety of options, picked what we thought were a nice little family. I think the wife worked for the council. Dad was a roofer and 3 kids under 5 or 6, I think. So nice little family for it was only a little 3-bedroom place.
Yeah.
So figured that looked all good until we got the call one day from the property manager that they had the police had knocked down our front door because they were dealing drugs out of the house.
Just curious, did they pay for that or did you?
I can't remember. So they definitely didn't get the bond back, but I can't remember whether that went to
the police or you.
Yeah. I'm not sure. I can't remember whether the police replaced the door or whether it came out of tenant's bond.
Whenever I see it on the news and stuff, and the police barging in the front door, and I'm wondering who's paying for that door. Did the police actually? But most likely not. Probably.
I'm not sure. And it's and look, I've got a bit of a a twisted sense of humor. So the property manager rang my wife, and my wife rings me in tears. Um, and I had the wrong reaction because I laughed because I'm like, you just can't write this stuff. Like,
No.
how did this happen? Um, but yeah, as fate turned out, I landed a job back in Sydney not too long after. Um, so we moved back into Sydney.
And was this
And
when you discharged, or was this another posting with defence?
No, so that was discharge. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So yeah, so like I said, wasn't wasn't super keen on sticking around
Yep.
with the army out there. So started looking for gigs. Landed a really good civvy gig planning freight
Yep.
trains
Yep.
back in Sydney.
Maintenance planning.
Um,
There was-
yeah, maintenance slash asset planning. So a
Okay.
little
Yep.
bit
Yep.
of both.
Yep.
Um, but yeah, so landed that really good money back in Sydney, which is where I wanted to be. So went through that process as a voluntary separation, but then in the course of doing my separation health examination, I picked up some documents in my med docs that turned it into a medical separation. So
Okay.
I've got some issues with my eyes, which is an instant medical discharge item, but it wasn't picked up. Like, it was just a specialist report. Like, I went to get some stuff checked out, and turned out I have this condition. Um, so started my new civvy gig, but was also going through the separation process. But again, like I said, being a bit boring, I kind of wanted the best of both worlds. So, I had long service, obviously, by that point. I was probably 11 years in. So took my long service at half pay to, so that gave me, 6 months where I
Yep.
could try this new gig out, see if it worked out, or, if it all went to hell, I could just pull the discharge and roll back in. But obviously, once the medical thing got picked up, that no longer became an option.
Yep.
But yeah, so moved back to Sydney.
And you
We
moved back into your home that you had purchased. Like, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, under some degree of protest from the missus.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, she wasn't stoked about it,
Just
but
because of the drug lab or whatnot that was
yeah. Oh
being a
well,
bit manly.
luckily it wasn't a drug lab, because I've heard some obviously horror stories about people
Yeah.
that have had meth labs and stuff in their properties, and the residue that leaves around. So they were just dealing from the house, apparently.
Yeah. Okay. Yep.
So there wasn't any cooking or anything happening, which
Yeah.
is kind of a weird designation to make, but there is a difference there. So moved back in, put some
Yep.
security stuff up to new security door and some cameras and stuff like that to give us a bit of just that sense of security back.
Yep.
And by that time, probably the bit I skipped is the second. We were pregnant with the second while we're in Townsville.
Yep.
So came back into Sydney just in time to make sure that I didn't have any Queenslanders in my family, which was good. So yeah,
Leave that one untouched.
so
I'm as a Queenslander, I'm certainly not bringing up state of origin. So just keep going with the property talk, hey?
wouldn't dream of it, mate. Wouldn't want to rub salt into that wound at the moment. But
It was handed to you on a silver platter with a send off. But moving on.
Oh well, there's a long backstory to that, but yeah. So we'd moved back. Like I said, the place was a nice little place, but it was 3 bedroom. And with number 2 on the way, we decided we probably needed something a bit bigger.
So just going back to when you purchased that Sydney one, where you said you had HPAS, you got DOHAS on it as well.
Correct. Yep.
And just
and
for the audience,
I can't remember the exact timeline, but I don't think DOHAS was a thing when I first bought McCready. I'm not 100%.
it should have been, because DOHAS existed in 2008.
Okay, right. Yeah, might have been
there. Or you possibly
so I definitely did get it.
afterwards.
I think I might have worked out what it was afterwards, and then applied for it, and because I had operational service, I got to roll that into cash that out. For that the 3 years or whatever it was, and then I still had some components left after that. Having said that, I did make a pretty big mistake in that space. So when we sold the first property and bought the second one, I didn't get the subsidy certificate in time because obviously as a medical discharge, you have additional entitlements on
Yep.
DOHAS. And I missed the boat on that hard. I think I got the subsidy certificate like 2 weeks after we'd settled. And the broker I had at the time, or the banker, was not keen on messing with all the paperwork to turn it back into a DOHAS loan in order to get the subsidy certificate sorted out. And
Right.
so I just like, yeah, look, I'll just leave it 6 months, then I'll go through the process and completely forgot about it. So I probably
Yeah.
left, 10 or no, yeah, maybe 10 grand on the table with
Would have
that
been like
mistake.
3 years of missed IR subsidy. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and at the top tier too,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
yeah, when you go out medical, it stays top tier for even if you haven't hit the whatever level it is. I think it's
Just to quantify in current policy for people listening, so if you voluntary separate, you've done 20-year service, you will drop back to tier one this is if you've not used DIHAS yet, or so you'll drop back to tier one. Where if you medically separate, you'll retain tier two or tier three, whatever's applicable to you if you're on those levels. But once you voluntary or medically voluntary separate, you can only apply and get one DOA certificate post separation. So there's no time frame like there used to be. But if you apply, get your certificate, and then go looking for a property and don't buy within 12 months, you will lose all your entitlement because you only get one. So the best way to do it is to buy and then provide the certificate to your bank afterwards, as long as it's obviously one of your three military DOAS approved banks. And then get the subsidy added to your loan so you don't risk losing it that way. Sorry, but go on. So you've sold the Sydney property and you're basically upsizing because you got the second kid on the way or just popped.
yep,
And you're looking to basically upsize the family home a little bit.
yeah, correct. And look,
Yeah.
at that point, I did look at the option of keeping the first property and renting it out, which would have been my first, or my first real investment property. I won't
Yeah.
count the 6 months in Townsville with the drug dealers, but
Yeah.
yeah, in the end, just was too tight on finances. Like
Yeah.
like couldn't make it work. Like the missus was in early childhood teaching,
Yeah.
so not a big money industry,
Yeah.
and yeah, it was a decent upgrade.
What
So
did
so yeah,
you, so you purchased the first Sydney for 450-ish, and what did you
yep.
sell for?
Sold for 710, I think, from memory.
Yeah, okay. So about 300, just shy of 300 up. And then
Yep.
you purchased the new Sydney home, a little bit bigger, for
For 850.
850, and that was about 2018, if I'm
Yep.
right in the timeline. Cool. Sweet. And then, so that's a four better?
Yes.
Yeah, cool.
Yep.
Was it just a little bit further out because 710 to 850 in the same year, so you paid a little bit more, but got a bit bigger house,
Yeah.
similar
Yeah. So a
area.
little bit further out. Yeah.
Okay.
Significantly bigger.
Yep.
And we've done a bit of work to it since then. But
Yep.
yeah, bigger block as well. So kids had a bit of a backyard. Was walking distance to a good school. Walking distance to local shops, and
Yep.
10 minutes drive to the train station to get in the city rather. So
Yeah,
so
lovely. So we've brought our first home. We've held it for a good few years. We've got some decent growth out of it. We've sold, we've purchased, upsized the family home. And then the first investment coming around 2023. That's when
yep,
you and I had obviously back in 17 construction at the same unit. I was probably banging on a lot about investment property this and investment property that. I think at the time I had four properties, and I would have been your corporal when you were a crafty swinging spanners.
yep.
Um, and you're in your second home. And then 2023, I think you looked me up on LinkedIn.
Yeah, well, funny story is, I can't remember what I'd always like, buying was always in the cards, like buying the first
Yep.
property. And then, once you got that taste and you sort of, started to develop get some capital gains out of it and start to see, your balance, like I'm I'm a numbers guy, right? So,
Yeah, yeah,
I was the sort of guy to like, save it on domain and real estate and check it every month when it updates to see, what I've gained over the course of the month. Um, so, as soon as we were in the financial position to do so, then my next goal was to go to get an investment property.
yeah.
And, obviously there was a bit of reluctance there based on the first,
Experience.
experience as a landlord. But, but figured that it's something that I wanted to do. So talk the missus around. And yeah, and obviously at the time, the kind of whole buyer's agents thing was kind of, well, from my perspective, was kind of new.
Yeah,
So started doing a lot of research, reading a lot of books, um, and actually, I think the reason that I looked you up in the first place is because I remembered when you were at 17 that you were doing brokering. So I was
yes,
actually looking you
yeah,
up to get some advice on brokering and see if you were interested in helping us out in that respect.
yeah, yeah.
And then obviously once I did search you up, then found out you're doing the buyer's agent thing.
That's all right.
Um, I was a bit hesitant about the buyer's agent thing to start with, right?
Yep,
Because as like, and as we is established now, there are a lot of dishonest actors out there, in terms of the buyer's agent space with like, and I've had people that I know, um, that have had experiences where they bought multiple apartments, in the same complex in one town. I was like, that sounds a
yeah,
bit weird for all the stuff that I'd read.
yeah.
Um,
So
so
what Ben's referring to there is house or either house land package or units and townhouses off the plan being sold where the developer's paying the property person or whatnot, the property advisor, a big undisclosed commission to, so they're essentially selling that product to the buyer and acting for the developer,
yeah,
which has been around for decades and decades. Um, the buyer's
yeah,
agent is more of a person that's engaged to represent the buyer and their best interest.
yeah, yeah. And the problem is, the people that do that address themselves up as buyers agents,
Yeah, and
right?
there's a
Um,
correct.
yeah. So I was a bit iffy about it, but obviously, given that we'd worked together before, and I knew you and your integrity, and I was like, you know what, I'm willing to take the risk on Kane and give this a crack, and obviously we did pretty well.
Yeah,
So pretty happy with the result.
April 2023, we purchased. Don't need to go into addresses or anything. I think we paid 467,500.
Yep.
It certainly wasn't in your backyard. Today, just doing a val prior to catching up, sort of sitting around the 850 mark. Does that sound about
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And April 23, so about 3 years, we've made 467 to 850, a good 400.
Yeah, getting real close to that double point. So
Yeah,
yeah, so
very well.
really happy
And
with it.
over 100, about 100 and 130 per year for 3 years consistently for him. I'm sure you already had the bug for property prior that you'd done pretty well off your home that you brought and sold. But if you hadn't, that's certainly a good first investment. Any issues tenancy wise with that one?
No, has been really good, and
Yeah,
like the Townsville market's just it's out of control, and we got in a really good time.
yep,
So yeah, I've only had maybe two tenants in there
yep,
over that period.
yep,
And a couple of repairs, like a knockdown fence in one of the cyclones, and I think one break in where the tenant wanted some security cameras installed, which I was happy to do. And I think one split system that I had to replace,
yeah,
but apart from that, really good with repairs, no issues with tenants. Actually looking at putting solar on one of the properties using the supercharged solar scheme that
yeah,
the Queensland's rolled out.
yeah.
So because the tenants were keen on that. So yeah, no, traveling along really well, happy with it.
Yeah. And then obviously property number two is doing quite well. I'm sure Sydney's still doing well. March 2025, we check in again, have a catch up, and we're back on the buying journey.
Yeah, well, a little bit delayed actually. I really wanted to go 12 months after we bought in Townsville,
Yep.
but had a little bit of surprise with kid number three that wasn't planned.
Oh, there you
So
go. That'll do it.
had to shelve those plans for a little bit.
Nothing like a
So
third child to put the brakes on property investing.
exactly. So yeah, my deposit to go again got spent on baby stuff
Yeah,
and all that sort of stuff. Um, so yeah, put the brakes on that for a bit, but as soon as we were, back into a good balance sheet, gave you a call to so we could go again. And yeah, bought in Wodonga.
yeah, lovely. So around March, April 2025, we're making the second investment purchase. Went with Donga and paid, was it 685?
Yeah, I think so. Yep.
Yeah, cool. And that was off market, wasn't it?
Um, can't remember. I thought it was on, but I'm not 100%. But
Might have been the
it
first that
was a
was
weird
off.
one because
We had a lengthy
the
settlement.
what's that, mate?
We had a lengthy settlement.
Yeah,
Yeah,
100%
yeah,
lengthy settlement, and then we had a lease back agreement
yeah,
afterwards because they were looking for a place in Melbourne, I think, from memory.
yeah, yeah.
And they hadn't secured it yet, so yeah, we were happy to lease it back to them for a
But
bit while they sorted that out.
and 685, just looking at some comparables and some values, sort of sitting at that, I would say close to high eights, like 890 range. Does that sound from
Look, I probably had a little bit lower just from my tracking, maybe 830, 840,
yep,
but yeah,
mid
sort of.
eights from
Yep.
675, so 100 and call it 850, 165 from 685 in March 25 to June 26, so just over 12 months. So again, sitting quite nice on that one as well.
Yep. Yeah, again, happy with that one. It took a little more time. Like Townsville was just a rocket, from
Yeah,
like God, the first couple of months I was just watching it tick up and up and up, and I was like, wow.
just
So
making more than I'm getting paid.
yeah, pretty much exactly it was.
Yeah,
So that kind of spoiled me, so we were still getting good growth
it
on
gives a
Devonton.
false sense of what's real, I guess, when you get perfect timing like that,
Yeah,
because it's certainly not the normal, and you don't want to go into building a property portfolio expecting that every time you purchase that's going to be around. There was this,
yeah,
um, and Perth was very similar. Like I remember we purchased a property for a client in Perth, paid 865, and then in 7 months later had a mil 50 valuation, bank val as well, not
yeah,
like looking at comparables. The bank actually valued it. So it was 190K in 7 months. Like it's just like the timing on that couldn't have been any better.
yeah.
But very good. And where are you sitting now? Like 12 months from that third purchase, just consolidating.
Yeah, well, just I had to exceed a little bit of the financial purse strings for a little bit. So
Yep.
I pushed really hard for all the investment properties. It was
Yep.
probably a little bit on the extremes of the missus risk tolerance.
Yep.
Um, so she wanted to do some stuff around the house. So she got a new kitchen and
Yep.
some new bathrooms and stuff on our place. So yeah, so that's set me back a little bit. So probably got to knock a little bit off that, and I am definitely eyeing off number three. So
Yeah. Lovely. Cool. Um, And so you've had the second one for just over 12 months, call it 15. The first investment for over 3 years now. Any other than the initial tenancy issue on the Sydney property, no real issues across the two. Like a little bit of maintenance here and there, which is always going to happen, but
yep.
holistically, we could isolate the Sydney tenancy event to a bad egg rather than a typical experience.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'd definitely say that's the case.
And you're never going to
And yeah, like
forecast these events. Like I've had it in my portfolio. I
yeah,
think the bigger your portfolio gets and the longer that you do it, the more chances are that something like this may happen. But property investing is all about mitigating risk, and landlord's insurance
yep,
is definitely a good way to. I remember very early in our journey, I'd moved out of the property. We had a tenant go rogue. Won't go into the details, but it's probably to the tune of about 7,500 of damage. Well, that's what we spent to get it livable again after, and our insurance claim paid about 4.5. So obviously there was 4.5K of direct damage, but we spent 7.5 tidying it up. So, there were certain things like we put a full new kitchen in rather than just sort of fix the one that was in there that they'd, ripped cupboards off and damaged and stuff like that. So there was always that little bit of a gap that we were going to cover because we, spent a bit extra on the renovation to make it tidy, which wasn't, couldn't be covered in the insurance. But ultimately, the landlord insurance that we had at that point in time, because it was quite stressful to go through, was very helpful to sort of smooth the waters as we navigated that. But again, that's I probably had across multiple properties over. I've been investing 20 years. Probably had 2 events like that. And it seems like it's your world's ending, and it can be stressful going through it. But looking back, it was all just part of the journey. And when you compare the growth that you can get in real estate, it's all you got to assess the profit and loss, the balance sheet, and the risk profile all together to sort of say, hey, I've still got a pretty good outcome.
Yeah, 100%. And learn a lot of valuable lessons from that first one too. Not only about picking tenants, but exactly like I said, the importance of having the right insurances in place and having a good property manager and all that sort of stuff. So definitely lessons that are carried through into the properties after that. But exactly like you said, like you've still got to you don't want to have that emotional reaction to it. You want to take a data driven approach and say, yeah, this is definitely a setback and it wasn't pleasant to go through, but at the same time we didn't come out too far behind. And God, like I would have loved to have stayed in Townsville for a bit longer and be paying those that Marrick Water rent and having the investment property ticking along in the background, but it wasn't to be. So
and just looking at the journey or the timeline that we've talked through, 2008 interest rates would have been peaking, GFC would have occurred, interest rates really fell off a cliff, stabilized, and I think the lowest they got, on an actual to the consumer, you could have got a fixed loan in 2018, 19 around the 1.6, 1.9 range. And then they've obviously recently gone through post-COVID as a lot of stimulus occurred. Interest rates went through 15 months, month-on-month increases, stabilised, a couple of cuts, and then a couple of increases this year, with a third one just around the corner potentially. So lots of fiscal change in your timeline of holding property. There's a lot of, I guess, media noise at the moment around budget and interest rates, war in Iran, inflation or stagflation being sticky. What obviously you've done well through property. So for anyone sitting on the fence, what would you say to someone like, there's obviously the media put lots of negative headlines to set a lot of advertising, but for people sitting on the fence that are potentially just holding out because of this noise around the budget, what would you encourage people to consider or do?
Yeah, well, look, it's one of those things. You can always find excuses not to do something, right?
Yeah.
But the way that I've looked at it since I started buying property, even with the first principal place of residence, was no one's found the alternate solution to houses yet, right? So there's still people being born, there's still immigration coming in, there's still just that population growth. Like people still need somewhere to live. So obviously there's going to be periods where it's going to be more difficult than others when the rates go up and all that sort of stuff. But for the entire time that I've been in property, and I'm pretty sure longer than that, people have been forecasting crashes and all this sort of stuff, and it's just kept plowing on, right? And part of that is the Australian culture about the importance we place on having of owning property, and that being a big goal for a lot of people, for a lot of the population. So with all the stuff that's going on. There's some stuff that's temporary. There's some stuff that's going to last longer, and these budget changes and all that sort of stuff are going to come into that too. But
Yeah.
the fact of the matter is, there's always going to be more people that need to live in a property or want to purchase a property. So I don't see a huge drop in property prices or anything coming anytime soon. Like, I definitely wouldn't expect to see some of the growth that we've enjoyed over the last 10 years. I think that's probably an unreasonable expectation. But especially with capital gains tax also applying to shares and stuff like that, there's not really any other safe havens left, where you get that preferential treatment. So it's probably not going to be the head and shoulders above option that it has been for like the last 15 years, but that growth, it's still going to be there. It would take something really, really severe I feel, for that to not be the case. So, and like my parents used to talk about it, when we were in, like I said, when we were living in Wagga, when my old man was an RI for a period, that they were looking at blocks in Wagga for like $27,000 or whatever, and they were like, "That's ridiculous. Like, I'm not going to pay that."
They've always said that. They've always said that.
Exactly.
It's too expensive. I'll wait.
Exactly. And you talk to anyone, of that age that's been around for a while, and they've all got that story of like looking at it and going, "That's ridiculous. I'm not going to pay that." Yeah, exactly. And that's what it is. That's regardless of all the stuff that's happened, COVID, GFC,
and that's why we call it opportunity cost. You spend time on the sidelines. The market waits for no one. And if you wait 2 years, even if you average it out at long-term, price growth average of 6.8, 7%, that's the cost of opportunity, of waiting on the sideline, and if you can pick your markets and front load some growth like you did with Townsville, it can be even greater. But there we go, Ben. His portfolio currently sits, we add them all up, about 3.1, 3.2.
Yeah, right. Yep.
Yeah. And a lot of that has been done through heavy lifting of the market. I'm sure we won't get into your personal banking, but I'm sure there's not $3.2 million worth of debt sitting there. So especially considering some of that growth that we've seen. So, a great story to draw some experience from, some great insights, market selection, 3 properties across 3 states as well. So, and some great timing there. So hopefully that's been
great
helpful.
Property selection, mate. So, I think that made all the difference, because, like, truth be told, when I first started looking investing, and before I'd come across the buyer's agent stuff, I was just going to look at doing it myself, and I would have probably tried and failed to get something in Sydney, with what I would have had to have forked out, and the borrowing power that I had probably would have kept me out of the market for longer.
In 2023, 465, Sydney, you would have been buying a shitty unit or something like a studio.
So,
or a car park.
So look, it wouldn't have been the same story if I hadn't have got in contact with you, and it's a big thing about having the right team, right? So that made a monstrous amount of difference to my outcome, in how early I was able to get into the market, and and cut back some of those missed opportunity costs. So it made a big difference.
Perfect. Well, thanks for your time on the podcast today, Ben. If anyone wants to reach out, just jump onto the website at discoverbuyersagency.com.au, and happy to book in and have a chat with anyone that's listening that's interested in talking about what their next step for journey might be. But until next week, thanks for listening.